Good evening. I'd like to call to order the special joint meeting of the City of Norwalk Finance and Claims Committee, as well as the Board of Education Finance Committee. And present on the Finance and Claims Committee members, we have John Kides and myself, Greg Burnett. And from the Board of Education, we have Brian Meeks and Bruce Kimmel. Other members might be joining once the meeting gets started. So we have three items on the agenda. We'll first hear from the city budget goals and preliminary revenue and expenditure projections from Bob Barron. And following Bob, we'll have a presentation from Tom Hamilton covering the Board of Education's budget goals and preliminary revenue and expenditure projections. So the focus of our special meeting tonight is really to share information so that we can have an open dialogue going forward, and both committees clearly understand the budget goals and objectives for the upcoming 2019-2020 budget cycle. Each of these goals and objectives have priority items, which is important for both committees to clearly understand as we move forward in creating one Norwalk budget. Actual budget requests, however, are not available as of yet. Actually, tomorrow, the city budget, as well as the grant agencies, will be submitting their input to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Barron. And then the Board of Ed's requests are due on Tuesday, January 15th. So actual budget input is still pending at this point. We do plan to have another joint meeting in January once all of the budget inputs have been submitted. And that will give us an opportunity to move even further into the details and specific requests. So tonight, we'll start off with, as I mentioned, Mr. Barron covering the City Department objectives and goals, followed by Mr. Hamilton, and any questions from the committee members that are present. Just so everyone is aware, we do have a hard stop at 7 o'clock so that we can start the regular meeting of the Finance and Claims Committee of the Common Council. Brian, I don't know if you want to share any comments.
Thanks, Mr. Burnett. I think you said it. Said most of it. I would just like to, say thank you to you and the Finance Committee from the city side to meet with us and staff for all the work that they've put forward that we're about to see tonight. I believe it's very important that we work together. The city is, I like to say it's a three-legged stool of schools, safety, and infrastructure, and if one's left short, the whole thing falls down. So I think it's good that we understand each other's needs and try to work around those the best we can within the constraints of finite resources. So thank you very much, and with that, we'll let Mr. Barron have a stand.
I only have 9 slides, and I'll be able to keep to the 20 to 25 minute time limit. I wanted to start off with a history of the grand list mill rate and tax levy. I know it's on everybody's mind. We have a revaluation coming up, and I'm starting with that because it does impact our assumptions going forward. Most of the second bullet says most of the slides came from our 2018 bond rating presentation. It was in June. We presented to the 3 major rating agencies and secured our AAA rating. The reason why there's no update to these forecasts is because we have no new information. As Greg had indicated, we're getting all the department's requests back tomorrow. The Board of Ed delivers their request on January 15th. And after the Finance Department meets with all departments, including the Board of Education, oftentimes their requests will change after discussions. I scrub their request, make my recommendation, and present it to the council on the second Tuesday, their first meeting of February. And so that's the first time you'll see what the roll-up of all the requests are. In the day before, it's all, the charter calls for the Monday before the first council meeting, I present it to the BET. So we'll begin with our last published audit, just to give us an idea of where we are. That's from 2017. Some of these slides I'm going to burn right through because the last few slides are what the agenda items are for. I want to talk about the operating budget trend. We'll have a 3-year operating budget forecast. This is a forecast that we had presented to the rating agencies. And then we'll talk about what our summary was for the upcoming 1920 budget year. And then I wanted to finish with the city's 10-year capital forecast and its impact to the operating budget, because it's becoming as the amount of debt that we issue grows and grows, the associated debt service, which is an operating budget item, grows. And I wanted you to see our choice to invest a great deal of money in the schools and the city over the next 5 years is going to have a dramatic impact on the city's operating budget. So let's get started. Here we have a grand list summary. The reason why I wanted to start here is I just wanted to give you an idea. If you take a look at the yellow highlighted areas, these are reval years. And so you'll see back in 2008, we added close to $2 billion to our grand list. It brought us up to this $12.6 billion figure. Well, what happened is that we had an associated drop in the mill rate of 11.5%. In order to generate this tax levy, we needed to send out $248 million worth of bills to run the city in that year, and so the tax levy increase was 4.9%. Well, then the recession happened. I'm sorry?
Four copies.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I did bring some.
Oh, thank you. I was going to go blind.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. This is going to make you crazy. I can shut it off. But the recession happened, and then we lost a great deal of value. So see, in 2008, when we added $2 billion to our grand list to bring it up to the 12, look what happened in 2013. We lost about $1 billion. And so this is what we've been saying in all our press releases, is that it's not necessarily the assessed value of your home that drives your taxes. What primarily drives your taxes is this, is how much we have to raise in order to run the city. So the opposite happened in 2013. We lost $1 billion in our grand list value, and the mill rate went up 11.8%. But when the grand list multiplied times the mill rate, it was all in order to collect $290 million to run the city in that year. So the change over the prior year was a 3.2% tax levy increase. Now what I'm forecasting, and you'll see, so I'm leading with this and then I'll end with this, is next year, I had forecast back in June, and I think we're going to have a little more growth in this, but adding about $1 billion to our grand list, it's about 7.5% increase. The mill rate dropping about 3.1%, and then the tax levy amount is 4.2%. Now, before we leave the slide, I just want everybody to understand is this 4.1% that went out the door, the bills that went out the door to fund this fiscal year, that was after the $2,950,000 contribution from the fund balance. This 4.2 number has no contribution yet. We haven't determined yet how much we can afford. I anticipate this number going down significantly because of a contribution from fund balance. But this is what we put forth. So We're just about to publish our audit. You'll have it in the next 2 weeks. I was promised a preliminary copy by Friday. There was a phone call I got that said it might be delayed until the next week. But this is the most recent number. So let's just take a look at 16, 17. 17, 18 you'll have in your hands in a week or so. We had a beginning fund balance of about 51 million. It's up here at the top. And you see we had $335 million worth of revenue and $330 million, about $31 million worth of expense. So we had an operation surplus of about $4.5 million. So that increased our total fund balance by that $4,477,000 number. But look what we did below. A lot of the dollars we said from our total fund balance, we're going to pull out and make available for spending in the upcoming year. This was the $1.3 million from the Board of Education's. They were funding the second year of their SPED development, so they took $1.3 million of their surplus and said, we're going to use it next year. This is 16, 17, so they were going to use their second year funding in 17, 18. And then this $2.9 million is a combination of city accruals, Board of Ed accruals that were carried forward. The biggest part of this $2.9 million is we had yet to settle our union contracts on the city side. So we had reserved for it, but we had to move the money over into 17, 18 when we were actually going to write the checks. So here's a 5-year operating budget trend, and I wanted to chop it up between the Board of Ed and city to give you guys a sense of what the funding levels have been. Here's what we've added to the Board of Ed's budget. At the end of 15-16, the city did a special appropriation of $1.1 million for use in 16-17. That was the first year of the 3-year SPED program. And then in 17-18, you know, this year that just concluded, we did the same thing. We did a special appropriation for $1.2 million in the last couple of months, and then it was carried forward for use in this fiscal year, which was the 3rd year of the SPED redevelopment. But anyway, when you add those two things to all the increases in the past several years, you have about $30 million worth of increase, or an average of 6.1 in these 5 years. On the city side, you have $16 million worth of increases, or about an average of $3.3 million. And then if you take a look at the total city, what have we averaged in the last 5 years in the total operating budget, city and Board of Ed in total? It looks like it's about $9.4 million is what we've added. The reason why I highlighted that second line, I don't know, you might wonder, how in the world did we only grow the total budget by $5.8 million when we increased the Board of Ed's budget by 7.9? And it's because the city's budget year over year went down by $2.1 million. That was the year, this is for 2017-18, you'll see it highlighted. That was the year we were moving over to the Connecticut Partnership Plan. We had excess reserves in our insurance fund, and we removed $5.5 million from our budget that year in order to accommodate that, that net growth in the total budget of $5.8 million. So now this is the, oh good, I'm doing good on time. Here's where we start making the assumptions. What do we present to the rating agencies as our near-term plan, the next 3 years? What do you think we can afford? So you'll see the 3-year forecast in the next slide, but here's the narrative. Operating annual budgets increases of close to 4%, 3.7, 3.8, and 4.3. I already told you about the first year growth anticipated 7.5% due to the revaluation. And then I have 0.75% in each of the non-revaluation years, plus the mall impact. We know what we're going to be getting for the mall, or have a good idea. Annual mill rate increases, we have that first year going down 3.1%. And remember how I said grand list up 7.5, mill rate down 3.1? Well, I think the grand list is going to grow a little more than 7.5, so I'm hoping the mill rate will go down even further than just the 3.1. But that forecast gives us tax levy increases of 4.3, 4.5, and 4.4 before contribution from the fund balance. So the agenda item said, give us a forecast on what you're looking for expenses and revenues. Here we go. I anticipate no growth in intergovernmental revenues. In back taxes, no growth. In supplemental auto, no growth. Investment income, we are earning more on our money. Last month hasn't been so good, but I have that growing at 1.5% in each year. Education funding I have at 3%. The current year appropriation for the Board of Ed is about $190 million times 3% is $5.7 million. And you'll see that on the next slide. Salary and wage projected growth is equal to the settled contracts on the city side, 2.36% plus steps. And you'll see in the future slides that that's all the city is increasing. I think our total increase is 2.5%. That is all salary increases plus steps. 2.36 for the salary, and then steps brings it to the 2.5. Now, in the assumption from the slides I have, there's no use of fund balance, and we are fully funding our pension and OPEB ADEX. We have an alternating year change in our collection rate due to our biennial tax sales. The year right before Lisa does a tax sale, we have a little tick up in our collection rate, so we account for that in our budgeting. So here it is. I highlighted a few things just to show you what, make it really clear, and then the next slide we'll focus on 1920. But I wanted to show you how this first column here is my forecast for next year over what we got approved for this year. What's approved is in the shaded first column. And I just wanted to highlight some anomalies. See that 13.9% drop in the accounting and treasury area? That was because we brought Chitsame, who's here in the audience, on in advance of Fred Gilden leaving. But Fred's now gone, and we're only going to have one controller going forward. Fred was a 19.5-year employee. The amount of months he worked plus his severance equal the whole salary, but that will not be present next year, and so that's why you see this big negative. Education funding, you'll see 3% in each year. Debt service. This is the known debt service and the known debt service for next year and the anticipated debt service for the outgoing years. The contingency, you'll see that we just kept flat. We keep about $1 million in their unallocated contingency, and that's what you'll see at the bottom. In the narrative in the previous slide, you saw that I was planning on no increases in intergovernmental revenue and the investment income going up 1.5%. So this slide is just the numbers representation of the narrative in the previous slide. So let's take a look at next year, what I was hoping to accomplish with this budget. We have the $5.7 million, which is 3% on the $190 million for the Board of Ed. And I broke out these three. Even though all three of these tend to fall on the city side, everybody says anything that's not education is all city, and it's true. But in the employee benefits, the city is paying for the Board of Education's workers' compensation claims, the Board of Education's liability, auto, and property claims, and we're paying for their OPEB, the insurance promises for their non-certified staff. In the pension line item, we're paying for the Board of Ed's pension for their non-certified staff. And in the debt service line item, well, you know what debt service is driven by. It's driven by the debt we issue for all the capital needs of the city. But it's a growing portion of those capital needs are the investment we've chosen to make in the city schools. So that's what these three categories are growing. So if you take those out, those are given, those are the contractual costs. We talked about having different buckets. Let's identify what's contractual, and then what's unmandated, and then what is your strategic goals. There's no strategic goals in this budget. These are known expenses that will be paid, and that leaves with the city with $2.3 million, or 2.5%, and that is driven entirely by its increase in wages due to salary increases and step increases. So I wanted to give you, I guess, some good news and hopefully try to convince you we're putting all our cards on the table here. See this employee benefit line item that's going up $1,925,000? I wanted to show you the detail for that. This is where we pay for Board of Education workers' compensation. You won't see Board of Education lap in this slide because I have enough money in that bucket and I've not funded it this, or I won't need to fund it next year. But the Board of Ed's worker comp at about $2.3 million. In the last 2 or 3 years, I brought it with me. The combination of Board of Ed's workers' comp and liability, the actual spending, out of the insurance fund, it's a different fund, is about $3 million. So here's the good news, is this number here that I approved in this year's budget. Remember the previous year where I told you, hey, how in the world did we give the Board of Ed $7.9 million? And yet the whole budget only went up 5.8, and it's because we took 5.5 million from the insurance fund. Well, this year, in this current year, we took $2.6 million from the insurance fund. And so this growth to next year is that $2.6 million, because I don't have it to put in again, and a growth of about, $600,000. So here's the good news is that I could have just said, you know, our employee benefits are growing by this $3-some-odd million, but I had an offset, and we had a wonderful offset. We moved, remember, pension is the pension payment promises to our employees, and OPEB is the insurance coverage promises to our employees. When we moved to the state program, our OPEB contribution went down dramatically. We moved from a Medicare supplement plan to a Medicare Advantage plan, and we saved a great deal of money. Look at this. Our contribution is dropping in the current year from $16 million down to 14. So that's why this employee benefit line item is going up less than $2 million. Because we're calculating in the savings that we received for moving over to the state of Connecticut CPP 2.0. Last slide, and I think I'm right on time, is I don't want you to forget the investment we're putting in our schools and the associated debt service when we're talking about the operating budget, because I just want to show you that here is the 10-year forecast that we do for the rating agencies. I've broken out the totals of how much authorized but unissued debt do I have before this current year? How much of the current year appropriation, what you appropriated last year, am I actually issuing in debt? It's about 9.5 million. And how much did I not issue over the summer? It was about 74.3. When you add those up together, what is that? 93.8 million. That's what you appropriated last year, but I only needed to issue about 9.5 million of it. We have the sum total of the capital borrowing in the future. And if you add up these three numbers, the 9.5, the 74.3, and the 110.8, that is the sum total of our 5-year capital plan. That's the best information I have for what we anticipate spending in the next 5 years with this 18-19 known. We also have reimbursements. Now, this is a little harder to tie out, but just trust me, is that this 70 million is the total of the reimbursements we have anticipated for all of the capital projects that we had in our 5-year capital plan, and last year's the prior year's appropriation that we've yet to start receiving money on. So we do. So this is all what we anticipate bonding for in capital, and then we make payments every year. So we have a principal reduction, and we have a net outstanding debt, and then we got the capital debt service. Last point I want to make is that in 2018-19, I have a budget line item of $28,447,000. If you look at the previous slide under debt service, you'll see for 19-20, I'm anticipating $31,137,000. So what is that? Ballpark, $3 million increase. But look what happens in 5 short years if we have all of the projects take place that we anticipate in our 5-year plan. That single line item in the city side budget grows from $28.5 million to $44.2 million. That is a significant operating budget expenditure that I'd like for you to consider.
Where are these numbers?
The bottom
Last
part of the slide, I think we've all seen before.
I'm in the
It
last
speaks
slide.
toward
See the
debt
numbers
service
he's talking
ratios.
It's 49 million, not 44.
If you look at capital debt service right above the bottom hash line,
Capital debt service, yep. Oh, I see. Those are the, okay.
Okay. So anyway, I think I'm done.
Could I ask 2 quick questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Bob.
Sure.
That was good. I understand the use of the debt service, our fund balance, and how we've done that over the years. I just have a question about projecting over a longer period of time, not using it. In your opinion, it will not grow enough so that if we do not use it, we will be beyond the thresholds. For instance, 15% of expenditures. You don't believe there's a possibility that we would go beyond 15% of expenditures because you're projecting no use of the fund balance. We would have to move money out of the fund balance if it did, if we were fortunate enough that it would grow so much.
Well,
Second
I
question.
don't know if
Let me
one
ask both
impacts
questions.
the
Let
other,
me ask both
frankly.
questions. The other thing
Okay.
is, the last set of figures on the debt service are similar to what I remember when we approved the 5-year facilities plan.
Right.
Earlier on, I did not understand the 15.2% that you have for debt service on, I forgot which page.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's,
Oh, yeah, it is the, see this 20, remember how I said if you go to the last slide, you'll see the 28 and the 31. Well, if you go out to the 21-22 year, you'll see this 38,850.
Right.
Well, 38,850 is 15.2% increase over the prior year. So 21-22's
Over prior year.
38,850 is.
my mistake.
Yeah,
My
no,
mistake.
no, that's-
I get it. So let me phrase the first question again. we try to stay within our policy guidelines, whether it has to do with the median of the other AAA towns, this is regarding the fund balance, or between 7.5% and 15% of expenditures. What happens, what is the process if we find the fund balance growing to a point where if we do not use it, it exceeds our parameters?
Well, let's see. I guess it threw me because I thought you were talking about the last page, which wasn't a fund balance. That was a capital forecast. But our fund balance policy, as you accurately said, is between 7.5% and 15%, with a target of the median of the 17 Moody's AAAs in the state of Connecticut. The median last year, it was like 12.2. Now it's 11.5. It's a crazy little thing. The state underreported its state on behalf payments like only 11 months in 1 year, and the next year they had 13 months. So as the denominator grew, the percentage fell. It just dropped. But my forecast for these 3 years puts our fund balance at 11%. So it will be 3 years out, it will be less than the median is now. But the fund balance policy, I think what's important to note is it says that's the first paragraph. The second paragraph says if you exceed the target, you can use it to provide tax relief. And we've all talked about how it shouldn't be used to fund ongoing operating expenses, because as we saw with the $5.5 million that I removed from the city budget in 1 year, and then I only had $2.6 million in the second year. Well, in the third year, I don't have any more money to pull from any other places, so I have to fund that in its entirety. So we don't want to use the fund balance to fund an increase in either the city or the Board of Ed's budget. What we want to do first is approve an affordable budget for the taxpayers, calculate the tax burden, and then use any surpluses to reduce that tax burden. That's what the fund balance policy says, and I think that's the appropriate way to do it, because if you mask growth in your operating budget for 1 or 2 years, this year from the insurance fund, this year from some other source that came in that we didn't expect, in that third year you're going to have to pay for it, and because it accumulates. So that's what the fund balance says, is that if we exceed the percentage, we can, and according to the policy, should use the surplus to provide tax relief.
We want to make sure Tom Hamilton has time to cover his information, so thank you, Bob. And
Sure.
If we have any other questions, we can get them to him.
If anybody wants the presentation, I have it on file. I actually have some extra hard copies too, for whatever reason.
Before he goes off, could you just walk us through for a second? I'm sorry I was late, but I had a work commitment. Page 7, and this is your proposal for next year. I just want to make sure I understand what the city is proposing. So you're proposing the increase of 5.7, but then I'm not sure what the benefits you're referring to are. The pensions, I'm assuming, the pensions, that's the state. That has nothing to do, I guess they're the non-certified staff. The city covers that.
Well, it's my pension, it's Tom's pension, it's the superintendent's pension. I mean, it's all city and all Board of Ed non-certified staff. And if you want to know what the employee benefits are, the exact numbers are on the very next page, the detail.
Oh, I see. Okay, you were just going through that when I walked in. And then debt service, this is what you're attributing to us, I guess?
No, this is the entire city.
the city.
The city of
Okay.
Norwalk, right.
Okay, so those three issues are mixed. so to speak, between city and the Board of Ed.
Right, and that's why I segregated them.
Okay. And then,
Now I understand.
Mr. Barron, I think this is quick because it's early, but the 7.5% jump in the grand list, is that kind of what Tyler's forecasting?
No, that's what I said earlier, is that most of these slides came from my June presentation to the rating agencies. That was my best estimate at the time,
okay.
adding about $1 billion, and I had indicated that I believe it's going to be greater than that. Honestly, we've issued all the preliminary appraisals or mailed them to everybody, but we're not giving a roll-up yet until we finish our informal hearings because the grand list is changing. But we will publish it at the end of January.
Do we have any early indication that Norwalk might be outperforming relative to other towns and cities, or in terms of growth?
Well,
I know it might be very early.
yeah, no, we would have to find a town that also has a revaluation at the same time, and they're not going to publish their results till the end of January. But I will tell you, I will get back to you because we have a neighboring town, Darien. They had their revaluation 2018 just like us, and they engaged Tyler Technologies just like us. So as soon as the numbers are available, first week of February, I'll do an analysis and get it to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I handed out 2 handouts. There's also copies at the end of the table here for anyone in the public who didn't get a copy. They're welcome to pick those up. And the objective, I guess, for us in the next few minutes is really to talk about the Board of Education, preliminary revenues and expenditure projections, as well as budget goals. And that's what the material that I distributed makes reference to. So I'm going to start on the revenue page. And what I've listed here is some of the major revenues that support the Board of Education budget, both some revenues that support the board's general fund operating budget, which is the main budget that is primarily funded by the city, and then also some of the major or most of the major non-general fund revenues that also support the district operations. So the first revenues you see on here are the education cost-sharing grant, and because Norwalk is an alliance district, the ECS grant is broken into a couple of different pieces that go to different places. So the first item you'll see on here is the ECS grant to the city. That money goes directly to the city as a general fund revenue to be used to help support education, and that amount you can see is essentially projected to be flat at just under $9.9 million for next year. Below that, you'll see a 2% ECS holdback, which under a special provision in state law, certain municipalities, certain school districts in Connecticut are permitted to hold back a portion of the ECS grant to be used for specific purposes. So that amount totals approximately $202,000. And then the last piece of this is the Alliance District grant, which, because Norwalk is one of the 30 Alliance districts, the Alliance District grant does come to the city. And there you'll see we are projecting about a $509,000 increase in that grant. Now that increase is predicated upon some changes that were made in the state legislature last year. So the second page of this handout, which has the graph on it, provides a projection essentially between fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2028. And what happened last year in the legislature was there were a number of changes made to the ECS formula. Previously, we had really a number of years where essentially the formula had been more or less not used by the legislature in allocating ECS money, that it was filled with all kinds of hold harmless provisions and provisions that aid would be capped and so on and so forth. And so last year the legislature did rework the ECS formula and indicated that the state was going to look to ultimately fund the ECS program in accordance with the formula as it was intended. And so there were a number of changes made to the formula. There was a change made to the wealth level. It used to be 90% based on property wealth, 10% based on income. One of the changes was it was changed to 70%, 30%, so that helped Norwalk. But because of the fact that these changes were producing winners and losers, if you will, the legislature said we're going to phase in the actual implementation of these changes over a 10-year period. So these changes to ECS are being phased in between 2019 and 2028. If the ECS formula were fully funded, what this indicates is that Norwalk should be receiving just over $16 million of ECS aid compared to the amount we're receiving in the current year of $11,453,000. So what you see is the phase-in schedule to get us from the current funding of $11.5 million up to the $16 million level. And so we have assumed, since this is now current state law, that this in fact is what will happen. Obviously, every year is a new year. The legislature will have to approve a budget, a state budget, and there could be further changes to ECS. But based on current law, we do expect, because of this phase-in of the funding of ECS, that there will be an increase to Norwalk's ECS grant of approximately $500,000. And because we are an alliance district, it's our expectation that that additional $500,000 would come through the alliance district grant. So that was kind of a long explanation, but the ECS formula is an important and complex formula, and it's a very expensive program. Even though the amount of money for Norwalk is not enormous, for the state, this is about $2 billion a year that the state distributes through the ECS formula. So it is obviously an important issue for the state. The Priority School District Grant is a separate grant that the district does receive about $3.3 million a year in, and we have assumed at this point that that grant will be flat. Again, this will all be subject to approval of the legislature and the funding of the Priority School District Grant by the legislature in the upcoming session. The next item on my list is the Special Education Excess Cost Grant, and you'll see that we're projecting that grant to go down by almost $1 million. And this is sort of the flip side of the success the district has had in terms of helping, in terms of reducing the number of outplaced students, in terms of reducing our number of very high-cost students. We are expecting that the excess cost grant will go down as a result of that. The excess cost grant is a grant that provides revenue back to the district when a individual student costs more than 4.5 times our average per pupil expenditure. So our average per pupil expenditure is $17,000 and change, I believe. You multiply that by 4.5, or times 4.5, you arrive at a number that we're projecting is going to be approximately $80,000. And when we have a student who costs us more than $80,000, then the state reimburses us the amount above that figure. And because we're expecting fewer very high-cost students, and this projection is not just a number that's sort of grabbed out of the air. We have literally student-by-student numbers based on information from our special education department of which students are placed where, which programs are in, what it's going to cost. And so this is a very detailed projection that we put together. So we are expecting that there's going to be some reduction in that grant that will need to be factored into next year's budget. The Magnet School grant is for the Global Studies program. We're expecting that grant to remain flat. IDEA is a grant that's from the federal government, funneled through the State Department of Education, that helps support special education expenses. We're expecting that grant to be flat at about $2.2 million. Title I is a grant that, again, comes from the federal government through the state, which helps, it's intended to address students living in poverty, and so it provides additional funding to provide additional supports to students who are likely going to need those supports. And lastly, we have the Medicaid program, where we're projecting the revenues to be flat as well. So,
Tommy, quick question.
Sure.
So long story short, you're projecting that you're going to receive $600 and roughly $80,000 less than you did the year before. Out of curiosity, how did your projections from last year end up? Were they in retrospect accurate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think last year was I'm trying to remember, last year seems so long ago, but looking at these grant programs, I believe we were on the mark on the Alliance District grant. I know that the 2% holdback, the excess cost number, we outperformed last year, so you'll see that we increased the budget, or we budgeted $4.4 million this year. We're expecting to essentially hit that $4.4 million this year. So we did outperform excess cost in 17-18 now, as I recall, because of course, at the time we're putting budgets together, there is a great deal of uncertainty about what's going to happen on all of these issues, because the state legislature typically has not adopted their budget, and there were discussions at one point about eliminating the excess cost grant and replacing it with something else. That didn't happen, but those discussions have occurred, and there were also discussions about reducing the excess cost
So
grant.
the projections for last year were for a decrease in grant funding, but the end result it was flat or a slight increase.
For 17-18, we outperformed in that particular line item, but we expect to be on budget for this year.
Tom, didn't we take a haircut on the priority school grant, like
We
late
did.
in the year? Like $350,000, I think the state decided to pull back?
Yes,
That was
actually,
across-
that's
That was across the state. That was just
right. There was
specific to
a
our-
reduction in 17-18 in priority school district. Actually, now that you mention it, there was also a reduction in the Alliance grant. So you are correct. I should probably.
I mean, to answer Mr. Kitey's questions, I think on the bottom line, we ended up flat, but it was because we outperformed in excess costs, but there were a couple of pullbacks from the state.
You're right.
late in the year.
Alliance and priority school district did get cut, and yes.
The bottom line is it can happen almost either way. These are
So we can
just
hope that
just forecasts.
So we can hope that we don't get less than the year before.
Tom, one quick question related to the special education excess cost grant. You're projecting a decrease in almost $1 million. Is that a result of us infusing 3.6 into a special education fund to address the very issue of special education?
I think it's because we're building some capacity in-house, so we are spending less on the really high-cost students. Sure. I mean, that's the way this grant program works, is they only reimburse you when you have a student who costs you more than 4.5 times your average per student cost. So you have to incur pretty high expense, $80,000 per student before you get any reimbursement. But yes, we have been successful in reducing the number of students that we have outplaced and therefore reducing the number of extremely high-cost students that we're servicing. So let me turn now to the other sheet. I want to make sure it's clear that this is, I've titled this a working draft, and these are preliminary numbers. They don't represent a request from the superintendent. They don't represent a request, obviously, that's been reviewed or seen by our board. These really represent where we are in the budget process right now, based on the requests that we've received and based on reductions to some of those requests. And most importantly, this is a outline of the district's strategic operating goals. So goal 1 I'll go back to in a minute, which is really current services, and then goals 2 through 7 are strategic initiatives that are outlined in the district's strategic operating plan as necessary initiatives in order to meet the goals that are laid out in the strategic operating plan of raising the bar and closing the gap. So I'll walk through each one of these quickly. Current services budget, obviously we have contractual salary increases for our employees, and those at this point are estimated to cost about $2.8 million, or about a 1.4% increase in the total budget. Our wages in total, both general wage increase and steps, are the number I believe, Kristen, was about 2.3%. So it's about a 2.3% increase, which would be general wage increase plus steps for our employees. Health insurance is a relatively moderate increase, and there's some explanation that I want to talk about here. So we're projecting an increase of 0.8 million or $800,000 in health benefits, which translates on the overall budget to about 0.4%. Now, one of the things that we have incorporated in here, though, is the expectation that we are going to require any of our positions that are funded from grant funds, we are going to attach the related employee benefit costs for those positions to be funded from the same grant program. So in other words, in the past, we funded some employee benefits from grants for grants employees, and in other cases, we didn't include the employee benefits in the grants budget, but rather included the employee benefits in the district's regular operating budget. As a sort of matter of policy and practice, we think it makes more sense to say if we have a position that we're going to fund from grants and that position carries benefits, then we want the benefits to also be reflected there. So what you see, if you dig into the detail on our health benefits budget, you'll see we went from, we're going from about $435,000 of grants expense charged to the grants budget to about $1.7 million. So there's a very large increase in grants that we will be paying for out of, or a very large increase in employee benefits that we'd be paying for out of grants rather than out of our local budget. So that sort of understates that 0.8 million to some degree, and it results in some items that perhaps previously had to be funded or were funded from grants, moving those to the local budget, because as we talked about earlier, the total grant budget is not going up, but in fact we expect it's going to go down by about $600,000 or $700,000. We also have in here built-in increases for transportation, and we have a final item that we've listed as other, which incorporates a variety of elements. It includes the estimated decrease in the excess cost grant. It factors in the fact that the SPED Development Fund is phasing out at the end of this year, and so any of the recurring costs that were funded from the SPED Development Fund that need to be funded going forward, those costs need to be built into the base Board of Ed operating budget. It includes certain expenses for technology related to making sure that the district systems are secure, and includes the benefit impact that I just described of building into the grants budget the cost of employee benefits for employees who are funded out of grants. So that all told racks up to about an estimated increase in the board budget, current services budget of about 10.3 million or 5.4%. And then the next items, the next several items are all initiatives, program improvements, if you will, that relate to the strategic operating plan. So to walk through those, goal number 2 is to provide program support for students who are enrolled in the district's choice programs. As you know, the district has been building a more robust system of school choice with magnet programs, intra-district magnet programs that are available to students. So what you see here, the Silvermine School dual language program, the Jefferson Science program, Columbus Magnet School, NECA at Norwalk High School, Norwalk Early College Academy, the Medical Academy at Brian McMahon, and the IB program at Brian McMahon, the Tracy Character School, the Marine Science Pathway, which is a new program, proposed program at Brian McMahon, and the Media Pathway at Norwalk High School. So because of increased enrollment, in some cases, actually, we've got a decrease at Jefferson because obviously we're in the process of building a STEM school at Ponus, but most of them are reflecting increases. So there's a budget adjustment of about $400,000 to support those magnet programs. Goal 3 is the board has approved a program of study, a high school program of study that increases the credits required for graduation. This is in accordance with a state mandate that is coming down. Yes, 5 minutes? Okay. State mandate that's coming down to increase the program of credit to 25 credits plus a capstone. And so there's 5 additional teachers and the cost associated with that built in. Goal 4 is actually a continuation of a goal that was initiated this year to add 30 minutes to the elementary school day, which requires 6 additional teachers at the elementary level at a cost of $690,000. Goal 5, again, is part of a second and final year of an initiative to provide band instrument lessons at the elementary grades at a cost of $400,000. We've already implemented that at 6 of our elementary schools. This funding would allow us to implement that at the remaining 6 elementary schools. Goal 6 is to expand summer school to the 6th grade. Summer school is an important component of reducing or eliminating the summer slide. The fact that students find their performance going down over the summer, and so putting them in summer school is a way to help that. So there's additional cost associated with that. And then finally, goal 7 is a additional choice program to initiate a Montessori primary years program starting with 1 classroom at Brookside at a cost of $317,000. So those are the goals that we built into or we're expecting to build into the budget for next year. Again, this is a working draft. Numbers are still changing. I don't want somebody to think that these are final because they aren't, but this is where we are right now.
Tom, could you address in the goal number 1, benefit impact, $1.3 million? I didn't follow what that was.
I'm not sure where do you see 1.
You said in the other You talk excess cost grant, the sped development fund, and the last one is benefit
Okay, the
impact.
benefit impact is the fact that we, as a policy, what we've said is if a position is funded from a grant, that the associated benefits should also be funded from the grant. So we've moved a bunch of our benefit expenses out of our local budget into the grants budget. And so that's why the increase or that's part of the reason why the increase in employee benefits is as small as it is because we moved off $1.3 million of expense that otherwise would have been in our local budget to the grants budget. But that $1.3 million displaces something else that's in those grants that has to come back to the local budget.
Okay, so it's unavoidable. I mean,
Yes,
Okay.
right. I mean, if we didn't do that, then you would have had 1.3 million more in employee benefits, but that 5.5 would have been $1.3 million less.
And then something else missing from this spreadsheet is, we continue to have rising enrollment growth, which we've had for a long time, and for many years we were never talking about it. When we were going to the city, we weren't telling them, hey, we're growing by 5–10%, and it costs more to educate more students, obviously. In addition, more and more of these students are ELL students, and they cost 30% more than your average student. So what are our assumptions in terms of enrollment growth for 1920 versus 1819, and what that breakdown might be with ELL? Because I think that's relevant, and I think the council members should know that.
Yeah, I think the final numbers, the projection,
23 total students overall.
right.
How many?
Reached a little over 400,000.
Do you have definite numbers that you can share with us?
We have updated enrollment projections from our demographer. The superintendent had indicated, based on that number of 23, he didn't think that we needed to put it on as a separate budget goal. But I don't have information off the top of my head on ELL growth, and that's something we'd have to look into.
Tom, isn't part of this we absorbed over 200 children in the middle of last year. I mean, we're just catching up to, this is capacity catching up to that influx, no?
We had those additional 200 students, though, in the final, our final enrollment numbers for this year.
Just on the enrollment, it gets to be unwieldy if we just don't go from the official numbers from the state from the previous October to this October, because there's always students moving in and moving out. So the issue is, compared to last year, I think we have our official, what we sent to the state, so we have a number. So what is the increase what is the increase over last year in our official enrollment? What is it, October 1st or October 30th?
First.
Yeah, October
October
1st, but
1st.
I don't have those numbs off the top of my head. They're obviously, we have them available, but.
That's a key number, and I think the council would want to see, because it is, as Mike indicated, important to get some enrollment numbers. The other thing is, does the request, even though in total the magnet school request is not a big chunk of the increase, does the magnet school enrollment numbers, does that somehow, does it jive with what we've seen over past years with the magnet school growth? And does it make sense in terms of the larger picture, our overall growth?
Yes, I mean, this is what we're expecting. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, the Silver Mine, the decision was made to phase in because we're phasing in one grade per year on the magnet school supplement. When it went to a full school dual language program, I think it was it 3 years ago now? That was when we said, okay, starting that year, the kindergarten students would receive the magnet supplement, and then when they become first graders, then we'd have 2 grades that would be receiving magnet supplement. I think we're up to, is it third grade? We're going up to 3rd grade or 4th grade? Yeah, 3rd grade.
For the council's information, for a number of years we had magnet schools. According to state guidelines, a magnet school, there's a supplement. You're providing a specialized type of education. And from what I understand, for a number of years we were not providing that supplement. And we now are trying to phase that in. Is that a correct
Yeah, and even, the amount that we're providing at $1,000 per student is really not consistent. The state guideline is $3,000 per student. So for the inter-district magnet schools like CGS, the state provides a supplement of $3,000 per student. And ideally, we would like to, at some point, start to move this $1,000 per student supplement up to something closer to that 3,000 level, but we haven't been able to incorporate that into the budget as of yet.
So you have magnets in name only.
All right. Just in the interest of time, because we do need to move into our regular Finance and Claims Committee meeting as publicly noticed. Are there any other closing comments or questions?
Just a comment.
Yes.
I know that the $12.9 million is a lot of money. It's a big ask, and we expect the council to look at it in a reasonable way. I'd like to put it in a bit of bigger framework. Last year, we agreed, I think, the council, the mayor's office, the BED, and the board, that we needed more time to discuss the board's proposals. So we went ahead and tried to devise a document in July, early on, that we could begin to think about and discuss before this time of year. And I think there has been a fair amount of discussion, whether formal or informal, there's been that discussion. But what's important to remember, and it wasn't part of tonight's discussion, what we adopted in July were 3-year projections. This 12.9 is the last big request that enables us, you don't have to laugh.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Price. This is the last big request. And if you look at the 3-year projection, it goes down to 4 and then 3. And then they will stay at 3. We consider these catch-up budgets.
When you say 4, you mean 4%, not 4
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
Just want to be clear.
But these were catch-up budgets. These programs, we just did not have. They were not funded over a very long period of time.
And the biggest spike is building up to the 26 credit graduation requirement for high school. We've been absorbing that over a couple of years, and we should start flatlining off of that after this year.
So goal number 3, you would say, is the highest priority.
We gotta
It's
finish it.
state law.
It's state law, yeah.
It's not even a priority. It's,
Yeah.
and some of our neighbors have already implemented this several years ago. We've waited to the very last minute.
When you look at the item, the goal on the school day extended, we had the shortest school day in the state, if I'm
Okay,
correct.
I got it. We
Yeah,
got it.
things like that. So we'll work this out one way or the other.
And I'll just close. I really hope we can have an amicable conclusion to this budget cycle. I believe we have common goals, and hopefully we can work this out where we don't chase residents away for taxes, but yet we continue to move our schools forward.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
That concludes the meeting.